There are evenings in this work when I light my lamp, pour my tea, and sit down at this desk with a quiet and genuine sense of pleasure. The creature to be documented is interesting, the notes are in order, the fire is warm, and the particular satisfaction of a scholar settling in for a long and careful night of thinking is a thing I have never once taken for granted. I am at my core a man who loves his work. And my work, broadly speaking, is understanding the things that most people would rather not understand, the creatures that live in the dark places of the world, the ones that have no interest in being understood, and the ones that would quite happily eat the person doing the understanding. Tonight is not one of those pleasant evenings. Tonight the fire feels smaller than it did an hour ago, and the tea has gone cold, and I have been staring at the first page of this entry for considerably longer than a guild head with 32 years of field experience ought to need before finding his words. Because the creature we are discussing tonight is not one I approach with pleasure. I approach it with something more complicated, with the deep, specific discomfort of a man who has spent a significant portion of his career trying to understand something that he suspects, in its most fundamental nature, enjoys what it does. I am Corvin Blackmere, head of the Monster Research Guild, and tonight, in what I have decided will be Volume XVIII of this encyclopedia, because a creature this significant deserves the weight of an even number, we open the file on the bloodbuck Fenrir. Its formal name in the Guild's Latin classification system is Vermilignis Thornmaw. The first word combines the root for crimson with the word for living wood, living red wood, in other words, which tells you something about the creature's appearance. The second word, Thornmaw, was added by the nomenclature committee after the first complete specimen examination, and I was on that committee, and I will tell you that the name was unanimous, and that nobody laughed when it was proposed because by the time we proposed it, we had all seen what the maw was capable of doing. In common speech across the regions where encounters have been documented, the creature carries several names: the amber wolf, the crimson timber, the rot bloom hunter, but the name that has spread furthest and that I find most accurate, most honest about what the creature is the bloodbuck Fenrir, not a wolf in any biological sense, but something that has chosen the shape of a wolf, the way a predator chooses a hunting ground, with calculation, with purpose, with the understanding that the shape serves the function, and the function is to kill, and to do so in a way that goes considerably beyond the simple mechanics of hunger. That last point is the one that has kept this file in a locked drawer for longer than any other entry in my career. I have documented creatures of extraordinary danger. I have written about the blight trap, the mycelial reaper, and I mean it when I say that creature is one of the most perfectly engineered predators in the known world. I have written about sea beasts that swallow ships, about spectral entities that dissolve memory, about things that hunt by sound and things that hunt in total silence. But those creatures, dangerous as they are, operate on pure biological logic. They are hungry, they hunt, they kill what they need, and they rest. There is a clean, if terrifying, purpose to them. The bloodbuck Fenrir does not hunt the way a hungry animal hunts. It hunts the way a fire burns, not because it needs the specific thing it is consuming, but because the consuming is in itself the point. It takes its time. It is creative in its methods. It has been documented on multiple occasions, disabling prey without killing it, and then sitting, waiting, returning hours later to resume. This is not behavior that serves a nutritional function. There is no caloric advantage to delayed consumption. There is only one word in my vocabulary that fits what the creature appears to be doing in those hours of patient, deliberate return. That word is cruelty. I do not use it lightly. I am a scientist. I do not attribute human moral categories to non-human creatures as a matter of professional principle, but after 32 years and 8 direct field encounters with this species, I have found no alternative explanation that the evidence will support. The bloodbuck Fenrir does not simply kill because it is hungry. It appears to derive something, some biological or psychological response that I cannot yet fully measure, from the process of the hunt itself. From the confusion it causes, from the desperation, from the moment its prey realizes what is happening and that there is nothing to be done. I want you to carry that knowledge through everything that follows in this entry. It colors every aspect of the creature's biology, its behavior, its abilities, its choice of habitat. Everything about the bloodbuck Fenrir, I have come to believe, is shaped not merely by survival pressure but by something that functions in its ancient and alien way like preference. It prefers the old forests, where it can move through the roots and the darkness unseen for hours before striking. It prefers prey that is not alone, groups, pairs, expeditions, because groups fracture under fear and fracturing prey is richer prey. It prefers the long hunt to the quick kill, and it prefers, above all things, to be the last thing understood before understanding ends. Pour something warm, settle in close to whatever light you have tonight. and let us learn together what it means to share a world with something that was built not just to hunt, but to enjoy it, the living cathedral. Where the bloodbuck fenrir dwells, the first sign that you have entered a bloodbuck fenrir's territory is not what you see, it is what you stop hearing. The forest goes quiet in a specific and total way that I have never adequately found words for in 20 years of trying, not the ordinary quiet of a still afternoon or a windless dawn, but a silence with weight to it, a silence that feels curated. As though something very large and very aware has arranged the absence of sound the way a hunter arranges brush into a blind, with deliberate intent and patient attention to detail. The birds know, they have always known, and they are gone long before you are close enough to feel the warmth of the amber glow through the trees. The bloodbuck fenrir inhabits ancient forests, not merely old ones, but the specific category of woodland that naturalists call primary growth, meaning forests that have never been cleared, never been logged, never been meaningfully disturbed by the reach of civilization. These are the forests that were old when the oldest cities were young. The trees in them are of a scale that requires a moment of adjustment when you first encounter them, trunks wider than a house, canopy cover so dense that the forest floor is in a state of permanent green-filtered twilight even at noon in high summer. The root systems of these trees are ancient and vast, and interconnected in ways that even standard plant biology finds remarkable, networks of root touching root, that extend for miles in every direction beneath the soil. The bloodbuck fenrir did not choose these forests by accident, it chose them because those root networks are its roads. We will discuss this at length when we reach the creature's abilities, but you need to understand now before we go further that the bloodbuck fenrir does not merely live in these forests. It is, in a meaningful biological sense, continuous with them. Its root structures interface with the existing root networks of ancient trees, the way a river interfaces with a delta, flowing into them, drawing from them, communicating through them. The forest in a bloodbuck fenrir's territory is not simply the creature's habitat, it is an extension of the creature's body. When you walk into those woods and feel the silence descend, you are not entering a place where the creature happens to live, you are stepping onto something that is, in a meaningful way, the creature's skin. The forest it inhabits shares several characteristics beyond mere age. First, they carry a quality that guild researchers have taken to calling excess vitality, plant life, that grows unnaturally large, unnaturally vibrant, unnaturally fast. Flowers 3 times the expected size blooming in months that should be wrong for them. Moss that has grown thick enough to swallow the shapes of large fallen objects entirely. Undergrowth so dense and so lush that it looks, to an untrained eye, simply beautiful, extraordinary. The kind of forest you might want to photograph or paint or describe in letters to people who haven't seen it. The kind of forest that makes people feel for a brief and dangerous moment that the world is richer and more wonderful than they remembered. This excess vitality is the bloodbuck fenrir's doing. The creature feeds the forest around it through its root connections, through the metabolized remains of its prey that it deposits back into the soil, through the peculiar quality of its amber sap that seems to act as a potent growth catalyst on surrounding plant matter. The forest thrives, and the thriving forest is its cover, its larder, its lure, and its weapon, all simultaneously. During our 3-week survey of the Vermilignis primary growth, we mapped an area of excess vitality covering roughly 4 square miles, trees with trunk diameters averaging 6 feet beyond the regional norm, undergrowth 3 times the expected density, 17 species of flowering plants blooming out of season. At the center of this zone, in a clearing where the amber glow was brightest at night, we found the soil composition to be extraordinary, rich far beyond anything the natural mineral content of the region could explain. We found bone fragments throughout a processed, ground fine, distributed so evenly through the top 18 inches of soil that it was clearly deliberate. The bloodbuck fenrir had been farming. We left that clearing at a pace I declined to characterize as running and chose, instead, to call a brisk tactical withdrawal. The second characteristic is the amber glow that the creature's lantern pods cast at night. This is the feature most commonly reported by travelers who have been near bloodbuck fenrir territory and survived, primarily because it is the feature most visible from a safe distance. Described consistently as warm, golden, and genuinely beautiful, like paper lanterns hung among the branches, or trapped fireflies gathered in swaying clusters, or the light of a distant fire seen through autumn leaves. In an unfamiliar forest in the dark, with your torch burning low and your companions quiet, and the path behind you less clear than it was an hour ago, there are few things more welcome than a warm light ahead. The creature understands this. At some ancient biological level that predates consciousness in any recognizable form, the bloodbuck fenrir has understood it for centuries. The glow is not incidental, it is the point. The third characteristic of its preferred territory is what I have come to think of as spiritual residue, though I use that phrase with the full discomfort of a man who prefers measurable facts and finds himself nonetheless confronted with something he cannot entirely explain. Multiple guild researchers, working independently across different sites, have described a quality in bloodbuck Fenrir territories that goes beyond the biological excess vitality. A sense of age that is more than the trees warrant. A feeling that the ground beneath your feet has been witnessed and remembers being witnessed. Some researchers attribute this to the creature's long occupation. Any large, intelligent predator that has occupied a territory for decades or centuries will leave behavioral traces in the ecosystem around it. Others, more quietly and usually only in private conversation, suggest that the creature's deep-root interface with these ancient forests creates something more like a shared consciousness between creature and landscape than simple biology accounts for. I have my own view, but I will keep it to myself for now and let the evidence speak in its own time. What I will say is this: every documented bloodbuck Fenrir territory has, at some point in the historical record, been described by local communities as sacred ground, as a place of power, as somewhere that things happen that do not happen elsewhere. The communities that live nearest to these territories, and they always live at a careful distance, never inside the forest, always at the edge, have built their mythologies around the creature for so long that disentangling the biology from the legend has been one of the more challenging aspects of guild documentation. In nearly every regional tradition, the creature at the center of these legends is not simply a predator. It is a presence. A being of the forest that has been there longer than memory, that knows the land in ways that cannot be known through sight or hearing alone, and that is, depending on the tradition, either something to be appeased or something to be feared absolutely and without negotiation. Having spent a career studying it, I find both responses entirely reasonable. Anatomy and physical description of the bloodbuck Fenrir have stood in front of a living bloodbuck Fenrir on 3 occasions. The first time I did not fully register what I was seeing for almost 30 seconds, not because the creature is subtle or easily mistaken, but because what I was looking at was so far outside the visual vocabulary I had built over 30 years of field work that my mind spent those 30 seconds trying to file it into categories it did not fit. The second time I was better prepared, and I spent the encounter making mental notes with the frantic efficiency of a man who is not certain he will have time to write them down later. The third time I finally felt something approaching calm, the particular calm of a person who has accepted the full reality of what they are looking at and is simply quietly in awe of it. Let me try to give you a picture that is honest rather than merely dramatic, because the bloodbuck Fenrir does not need dramatic description. The truth of its appearance is sufficiently extraordinary to require no embellishment. The creature's fundamental form is large canid. It has chosen, through whatever ancient evolutionary process produced it, to build itself in the general shape of a wolf. The proportions are not quite right, the way a skilled forgery is not quite right recognizable, but off in ways that the eye detects before the mind can articulate them. It is larger than a wolf, considerably. The largest documented specimen measured 11 feet at the shoulder and nearly 20 in total body length, with the mass of something between a large draft horse and a very large bear. The musculature is visible, defined, and powerful in the way you would expect of a predator that has been the undisputed apex of its ecosystem for centuries. But the musculature is made of wood. Not covered in wood, not armored with wood on the outside while flesh works beneath. The structural material of the creature's body, the thing doing the work of muscle fiber and bone and tendon, is red wood. Living, grain-patterned, visibly fibrous crimson timber, with the grain running in the directions that muscle grain would run in a biological animal, flowing along lines of structural stress and force transmission. When the creature moves, you can see those grain patterns shift and flex and realign, the way wood bends in a strong wind but does not break, the way a tree absorbs force rather than resisting it. There is a creaking sound when it moves quickly, a deep, resonant sound like a tall tree in a storm or the settling of a large old house, and this sound, which survivors report with remarkable consistency, is the sound of vast quantities of dense red wood flexing under load. Running through this wood body, visible at the surface as thin, branching channels wherever the bark covering is thinner, is the creature's circulatory fluid, a heated, glowing amber sap that serves the function of blood without being blood in any recognizable sense. In normal resting state, this sap glows dimly, a warm undertone that makes the creature's surface look lit from within, like a lantern wrapped in bark. When the creature is active, agitated, or in the process of rapid regeneration, this glow intensifies dramatically, and the channels through which the sap flows pulse visibly, rhythmically, the way veins pulse in the wrist of a creature at exertion. In the dark of a forest, an active bloodbuck Fenrir glows, not softly, not merely the lantern pods the entire body. It is in that moment one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen in the field. It is also one of the most terrifying. The head is where the wolf resemblance is strongest and most deliberately unsettling. It is carved, that is the word I keep returning to because it is the most accurate one, in the shape of a snarling wolf's skull, but rendered in that same crimson wood, so that what you see is a face that looks like it was made by something that had studied wolf skulls and recreated one from memory, with perfect structural accuracy and complete absence of the softness that living flesh usually provides. The jaw is long and prominent. The muzzle is squared at the tip where a wolf's would taper, and the teeth, I want to be precise about the teeth, because they are distinctive and they matter, are not the flat-sided flesh-tearing tools of a biological predator. They are ivory thorns. Long, tapered, smooth as carved bone, arranged in rows that curve inward in the manner of a fish hook. They are designed, as the teeth of the blight trap are designed, not for crushing but for holding, for ensuring that what enters the maw does not leave it. The eyes are amber, the same amber as the sap, the same glow as the lantern pods, but concentrated into 2 points of focused, radiant light set deep in the carved wooden sockets of the skull. They move with intelligence. They track, they assess. In the 3 encounters I mentioned, the creature's eyes were on each occasion the first thing that fully convinced me that what I was looking at was not merely a very large and very strange animal. There was something behind those eyes, something that I am not prepared to quantify as consciousness in the philosophical sense, but that I am equally not prepared to dismiss as mere animal awareness, something that understood what I was, something that was deciding what to do about me. Along the creature's back, erupting from the spine in the way that a great crest might rise from a more conventional creature, grows the crimson flower. It is large. On an adult specimen, the full bloom diameter can exceed 4 feet, and it is a dahlia-like construction of dense, layered petals in deep crimson with amber veining that matches the sap channels beneath the bark. It moves independently of the creature's body. Not with the wind, there is never wind enough to move it, but with its own slow, deliberate motion, turning toward sound, toward heat, toward any stimulus that reaches it through the sensory network it appears to share with the creature's central awareness. It breathes in the most literal mechanical sense. The petals expand and contract in slow, visible cycles, drawing and expelling air through apertures between the petal layers. Survivors who have seen the flower up close and lived to discuss it return, with uncomfortable frequency, to the same description. They say it looks alive in a way that the rest of the creature, strange as it is, somehow does not. The vines and lantern pods that wrap and drift around the creature's body are the final element of its appearance, and the most deceptively gentle-looking. The vines themselves are thick, sinuous, clearly mobile. They shift and rearrange constantly, never entirely still. The pods they carry, perhaps 24 on a large specimen, hang at varying lengths and emit that warm golden light that we have already discussed. Up close, the light inside each pod is not uniform. It pulses very slightly, in rhythms that do not quite match the creature's breathing or the sap's circulation, and that several researchers have described as feeling uncomfortably like a heartbeat that belongs to something other than the creature carrying it. What those pods contain is a question the Guild has not yet fully resolved. What we know is what they do, and what they do is pull things toward the creature that the creature has decided it wants. The whole creature, seen clearly in the amber light of its own body, is extraordinary. I do not shy away from that word. It is a thing of savage, violent, inhuman beauty, assembled from forest and light and hunger and the deep patience of something that has been waiting in its ancient woods for longer than most civilizations have existed. And if the beauty makes you lower your guard for even a single moment, then the creature has already won the most important part of the encounter. What the forest gave it. Every creature in this encyclopedia possesses abilities, biological tools, evolved over time that serve the function of survival. Some creatures have 1 or 2 abilities of exceptional note. A handful have 3. The bloodbuck Fenrir has 6. 6 documented, researched, classified abilities that work in concert with an efficiency that, once you have seen them operate together in the field, begins to look less like the product of evolution and more like the product of design. As though something, somewhere in the long dark history of these ancient forests, sat down and thought carefully about what a perfect predator would need to be able to do, and then built one. We will cover the 6 abilities across 2 segments. Tonight we begin with the 3 that form the creature's defensive and movement architecture, the foundation upon which the more overtly offensive abilities are built. These are sapphire regeneration, barkite armor, and rootstep ambush. Understand these 3, and you understand why the bloodbuck Fenrir is, in the Guild's operational assessment, effectively impossible to kill in the field with conventional means. Let us begin with the most visible and most immediately alarming, sapphire regeneration. The amber sap that circulates through the creature's body does not merely serve the functions that blood serves in biological creatures: oxygen transport, chemical signaling, temperature regulation. It is also simultaneously the creature's primary repair mechanism. When the creature sustains damage, when wood splinters, when bark cracks, when a limb is struck hard enough to cause structural disruption, the sap responds immediately and with a speed that should not be biologically possible. It floods the damaged region, filling the gap the way water fills a crack. And then, in a process that I have observed 3 times and still do not entirely understand at a mechanistic level, it hardens, not slowly the way sap hardens over days into amber, immediately. Within seconds of exposure to air, the flooding sap begins to set, and within a minute it has formed a rigid substrate of fresh red wood that seals the wound, restores structural integrity, and within an hour is functionally indistinguishable from the original material. This means that the creature heals in real time during a conflict. Strike it, and the wound closes before you can deliver a second blow to the same location. Severe enough damage, a limb severed, a large section of the body deeply compromised, will slow the regeneration, because the volume of sap required is greater and the structural rebuilding more complex. But given sufficient time and sufficient nutrition, and the creature, as we will discuss, is rarely short of either in its own territory, even severe damage is temporary. Guild records document 3 separate expeditions that believed they had mortally wounded a bloodbuck Fenrir specimen and withdrew to make camp, only to find that by the next morning the creature was walking the perimeter of their camp with full structural integrity. The evidence of the previous day's conflict already vanished into new red wood and fresh hardened amber. The second defensive ability is the one that makes injuring the creature sufficiently to trigger meaningful regeneration, so monumentally difficult in the first place: barkhide armor. The outer surface of the creature's body is not uniform in hardness. The softer regions, the joint articulations, the underbelly, the thinner sections of the limbs, are comparable in resilience to dense tropical hardwood, which is to say that they are significantly harder than flesh and bone, but vulnerable to sustained, well-aimed attack with appropriate tools. The harder regions, however, concentrated particularly along the shoulders, the spine, the reinforced plates at the sides of the skull, and the leading edges of the forelimbs, achieve a material density that multiple guild tests have confirmed exceeds the hardness of most refined steels. Standard guild field blades on direct strikes to these reinforced sections have produced nothing more than superficial scoring. Crossbow bolts at full combat draw have bounced. One researcher attempted to use a military-grade siege maul on a post-mortem specimen's shoulder plate and reported that the impact was absorbed rather than transmitted. The plate flexed and returned to position like a material with elastic properties rather than the brittle fracture behavior you would expect from stone or metal. The practical implication of this is that attacking a bloodbuck Fenrir requires knowing exactly where its softer regions are, striking those regions specifically, doing so rapidly enough that the regeneration cannot keep pace, and somehow accomplishing all of this while the creature is actively trying to kill you and the forest around you is responding to its will. For reference, the soft regions of the underbelly are accessible only when the creature is low to the ground, which is not a position it typically adopts in conflict. The joint articulations of the limbs are small, mobile, and bordered by hardened plates. I'm not saying it cannot be done. I am saying that the number of people who have done it and survived to report on the experience fits comfortably within the seating capacity of a small room. The third ability, Root Step Ambush, is the one that makes the previous 2 almost academic, because it is the ability that ensures the creature very rarely has to absorb a significant attack at all. The bloodbuck Fenrir can travel through root systems. This is not a metaphor or an approximation of something more complex. The creature literally merges its lower body with the existing root networks of the forest floor, navigates through them at speed, and emerges at a different location. In its own territory, where it has had years or decades to fully interface with the ancient root networks of primary growth trees, this travel is silent, undetectable by any surface observation, and extraordinarily fast. We have documented emergence events, the creature rising from the forest floor at a location it was not at 30 seconds earlier, at distances of up to 400 yards from the last observed surface position. What this means in practical terms is that tracking the creature through its territory is functionally impossible with conventional methods. You cannot follow its footprints because it left no footprints. You cannot predict its location based on last seen position because last seen position is irrelevant. The creature you are watching at the edge of the clearing is not the creature that is about to emerge 4 steps behind you. And the emergence itself, which survivors describe as roots suddenly boiling upward from the ground, earth splitting, a sound like timber under catastrophic stress, and then the creature simply there where it was not, is designed to maximize the psychological impact on whoever is watching it happen. The creature does not simply appear, it erupts, and it arrives already moving, already at full velocity, already inside the distance at which most prey has any realistic response time. Following the loss of the Verenmore response team, 6 researchers, including 3 with Guild combat certification, we conducted a formal operational review of anti-bloodbuck Fenrir protocols. Conclusion: no current Guild protocol is adequate for a direct engagement within the creature's territory. Rootstep ambush alone eliminates the possibility of defensive formation holding. Combined with barkite armor and sapphire regeneration, a direct engagement in the creature's home forest is assessed as unsurvivable at standard guild team sizes. Recommended protocol: perimeter observation only from prepared positions at forest edge, with immediate withdrawal triggers. 3 abilities, each one in isolation, would make the creature one of the most difficult targets in the guild catalog. Together, they form a system of such completeness that the creature is, within its own territory, essentially invulnerable to everything we have tried to bring against it. And we have, over the years, tried quite a lot. What we have not yet discussed are the abilities that make the approach to conflict possible in the first place, the ones that bring prey close, that dissolve resistance, that turn the forest itself into a weapon aimed at whoever is unlucky enough to be walking through it. Those are the abilities that complete the picture, the hunt and the table. We have established that the bloodbuck Fenrir is nearly impossible to injure, capable of healing whatever injury you manage to inflict, and able to travel unseen through the root networks of its forest at speeds that eliminate any reliable sense of where it is at any given moment. These 3 facts alone would make any field researcher's day considerably worse than expected, but they represent only half of the creature's documented ability set, the half concerned with its own survival and movement. The other half is concerned with something different. The other half is concerned with you. Specifically with how to get you close, how to separate you from your companions and your reason and your map of the situation, how to make the forest that surrounds you into a weapon that works from every direction at once, and how to make sure that when the moment of final contact arrives, you are not the capable, prepared, well-armed person who walked in at the forest edge 2 hours ago, but something smaller, something confused. Something that has made, in the last stretch of forest, a series of decisions that were perfectly reasonable at the time, and that have nonetheless delivered you precisely where the creature needed you to be. The lantern lure is where it begins. We have mentioned the amber glow of the lantern pods in passing, but I want to address it here in full, as an ability, with the attention it deserves, because dismissing it as mere light would be a significant underestimation of what the creature is doing with it. The pods emit light, yes, warm, golden, gentle, beautiful light, but the quality of that light, the specific temperature of the color, the specific rhythm of the slow pulsing, has been analyzed by guild optical researchers and found to correspond with remarkable precision to the light profile of sources that the human nervous system has been associating with safety for as long as human nervous systems have existed. Fireflies specifically, whose light pattern the pod glow replicates with such accuracy that comparative analysis requires instruments rather than eyes to identify the difference. The light of a fire seen through trees, the light of a candle in a window, the light that means someone is there, that you are not alone, that there is warmth ahead and the long cold dark of the forest is coming to an end. The lure is not primarily visual. That is the detail that took guild researchers years to fully accept. The light acts on the nervous system not as a visual cue to be consciously processed, but as a biological signal, something deeper than thought, older than reason, that creates in the observer a pull toward the source that feels, from the inside, entirely voluntary. Survivors describe making the decision to walk toward the light with full consciousness, full awareness that they were making a decision, and complete confidence that it was the right one. The wrongness, when it became apparent, was not immediately that the light was dangerous. The wrongness was that they had walked further than they intended to, without noticing. That time had passed strangely, that the decision to keep walking had renewed itself automatically at every moment when it might otherwise have been reconsidered. The lure does not force you forward. It simply makes turning back feel, at each moment you might choose to do so, like the less reasonable option. Once the creature has brought you close enough that rootstep emergence is viable, close enough that the flower on its back has acquired reliable sensory data on your position and composition, the pollen hex deploys. The crimson flower, which we have established is a sensory and dispersal organ of considerable sophistication, releases its pollen load in a directed release rather than a general cloud. The direction is not random. The creature has been using the flower to track you for longer than you have been aware of the creature, and when the pollen releases, it releases toward you specifically. The hallucinations it causes have been extensively documented from survivor accounts, and they share a pattern that I find deeply significant. They are not arbitrary sensory distortions, not the random visual noise that some toxins produce. They are constructed from the specific emotional content that the flower's sensory analysis has identified as most potent in the individual target. Loved ones, familiar voices, safe places, the particular shape of comfort that is most uniquely yours, the one that your body has the deepest, oldest response to. The hallucinations are tailored, they are personal. They use you against yourself with a precision that implies something about the flower's sensory capability that I am not yet fully comfortable stating as fact. I saw my brother at the edge of the clearing. Not a shadow of him, not something that looked a bit like him exactly wearing the coat he wore the last time I saw him 12 years ago. He was calling to me. I walked toward him for 300 yards before I tripped on a root, and the impact cleared enough of it that I understood for one terrible second what was around me. I ran. I do not know how I got out. I do not know why it let me go. Junior researcher Maren Aldis, recovered account, year 440, the Varanmore survey. While the pollen hex is active and the prey is navigating a landscape that exists only inside their own mind, the third offensive ability completes the encirclement, Thornbind Dominion. The creature commands the plant life of its territory, not in the metaphorical sense of simply belonging to a forest ecosystem, but in the active, immediate sense of direction. Roots that were dormant a moment ago burst upward from the ground. Vines that were lying still begin to move with precise, targeted purpose. Thorny growths, some of them large enough to impale, erupt from soil that was cleared 10 seconds earlier. The forest attacks. The range of Thornbind Dominion extends to the full range of the creature's root interface, which in its own territory can be several hundred yards. This means that prey who believe they have escaped the creature, who have passed the point where they can see it, who are running hard toward the forest edge, it can still be caught by the forest itself, acting as the creature's extended arm, roots across the path. Vines at ankle height. A wall of thorns at the gap in the undergrowth that was the most obvious escape route, closed off and waiting before the fleeing prey reaches it. The exit that was there is no longer there. The prey turns. Looks for another way. There is another vine, another route, and somewhere behind them, patient, unhurried, letting the forest do the work, the creature walks in the amber light of its own body and waits. This is the sadism that I mentioned at the outset, and I want to name it directly here, with the full weight of the documented evidence behind me. The bloodbuck Fenrir does not need to chase its prey. Thornbind Dominion means it can herd prey at leisure. The pollen hex means the prey frequently cannot tell real from unreal. Rootstep ambush means it can be anywhere instantly. And yet, consistently, across documented encounters, the creature does not use the efficiency these abilities would permit. It lets prey run, it watches the running. It allows moments of hope, of apparent escape, of the belief that the forest edge is close and freedom is possible. And then it closes the option, not all at once, not with the clean efficiency of something that simply wants a meal. It closes options one at a time with what can only be described as theatrical deliberateness, and the timeline of a documented bloodbuck Fenrir hunt is almost always significantly longer than the creature's abilities would require if its only interest were feeding. On the subject of feeding, the creature is primarily carnivorous. Large mammals, deer, boar, bears are its most consistent prey, supplemented by the photosynthetic contribution of the great flower on its back and the nutrient absorption that its root connections to the forest soil provide. Humans are consumed only occasionally, which is perhaps the only element of the creature's diet that feels, from our perspective, like restraint, and which I suspect has less to do with restraint and more to do with the fact that humans bring complications the creature finds inconvenient. We travel in groups, we send others when members do not return, we document and study and come back with fire. What the creature does after feeding is the detail I find most haunting of all the documented facts in this file. After consuming large prey, it does not simply move on. It takes fragments of what remains, bone, processed material, dense organic matter, and plants them, deliberately, specifically, distributed through the soil of its territory at depths and densities that maximize nutrient dispersal for the surrounding root systems. The creature turns its prey back into the forest, and the forest grows richer and taller and more lush and more beautiful, and the next traveler who comes to the edge of those trees and looks in at the extraordinary, impossible vitality of the growth inside will feel, for a dangerous moment, that it is one of the most beautiful places they have ever seen, the lights in the deep grove. 300 years ago, give or take the imprecision that comes from documents that have been copied and translated, and in some cases reconstructed from partial originals, a man named Aldous Crane led a scholarly expedition into a forest that regional maps of the period marked as the Deep Grove, a primary growth woodland in the Heartland territories, covering then, as it covers now, a region roughly 30 miles across and so old that several of the trees at its center predate the construction of the oldest standing human structures in the same region by several centuries. Crane was a naturalist of some reputation, the type of scholar who is driven by a genuine and wonderful hunger to understand the world in its full complexity, and who had a tendency, common to that type, to underestimate the world's capacity for being more complex than he was prepared for. The expedition numbered 11 members, Crane himself, 3 junior scholars, a cartographer, a field physician, 2 armed escorts, a cook, a supply handler, and a young woman named Seraphine Vaught who had attached herself to the expedition in the capacity of recorder, and who would, by the end of it, be the only person to return from the deep grove with any account of what had happened inside it. Crane's journal, which survives in the Guild archive in a state that I would describe as fragmentary but legible, documents the expedition's first 2 days with the methodical enthusiasm of a scholar in excellent spirits. He notes the quality of the forest, the extraordinary density of the canopy, the unusual size of the undergrowth species, the absence of birdsong once the party passed the first mile marker inside the tree line. He attributes the silence to the thickness of the canopy, reducing the ambient temperature, and therefore the insect populations that birds typically follow. He is not wrong about the mechanism, he is wrong about the significance. On the second evening, making camp in a hollow formed by the root buttresses of 3 enormous old oaks, the party first noticed the lights. Crane's journal entry for that evening is one of the most frequently excerpted passages in Guild training documents, not for its analysis, which is absent, because Crane did not yet know he was analyzing anything, but for the quality of its observation. He writes that the lights appeared shortly after full dark, hanging among the branches approximately 200 yards into the forest ahead of camp, warm, golden, swaying gently. He compares them, in terms that would be charming in a different context, to paper lanterns at a harvest festival. He notes that 3 members of the party stood up from the campfire to look at them. He notes that he himself felt, and he uses this exact phrase, a pull toward them like a hand on my shoulder. He did not follow the lights that night. He noted them, sketched them in the journal's margin, and went to sleep. This is, in retrospect, the decision that kept him alive through the second night. The third day the forest smelled differently. The sweetness of it, several party members commented on it. Crane records their comments in the journal, was floral but wrong, the way something preserved in too much sugar is wrong. Present in sufficient quantity to be slightly cloying, slightly insistent, in a way that you noticed more at the edges of attention than directly. 2 of the junior scholars reported that evening that they had briefly lost the path and found themselves further into the forest than the party's planned route accounted for before realizing their error and returning. Neither could explain exactly how it had happened. Crane records this with mild puzzlement but no alarm. He still did not know what he was in. On the third night, a member of the party named Harris, one of the armed escorts, a practical and experienced man by all accounts, walked toward the lights. He said before he went that he heard his daughter calling. He said it quietly, almost to himself, and several party members heard it but assumed he was speaking in his sleep. He was sitting near the fire with his eyes open, but his expression had a quality Seraphine Vaught writes in her own account of someone listening to something that nobody else in the camp could hear. Then he stood up, picked up his lantern, and walked into the forest in the direction of the amber glow. 4 others followed him within the next few minutes, each pulled by something different, a voice, a light, a sound that was described afterward by the one who returned as like my name being said in a voice I recognized but couldn't place. Crane himself felt the pull and resisted it, though he writes in the journal that resisting it was the hardest thing he had done that night, and that it felt from the inside like refusing to do something entirely reasonable and good, rather than like the exercise of survival instinct he would later understand it to be. The field physician, who had not followed, began treating one of the junior scholars for an allergic response to what they initially assumed was pollen from a regional plant species. The symptoms, blurred vision, spatial disorientation, a dreaming quality to sensory perception, were being documented when the sound came from the trees, not from the direction Harris and the others had gone. From the left, then from behind, then from below, which was the sound that Seraphine Vaught wrote about in such specific detail that it has appeared, verbatim, in every Guild training document covering this species since the file was first opened. The ground opened. Not in the catastrophic sense of geological collapse, in the way that something controlled opens something it has chosen to open. Roots erupted in a directed, intentional motion, not randomly but specifically, wrapping around the ankles of 2 men simultaneously, dragging them downward with a force that the cartographer who witnessed it from 3 feet away described as being like watching something underwater pull a person under from below. One man managed to shout before he was gone. The other was simply not there where he had been, and the earth had closed. And then, in the light of the campfire, which was now the only light, because the amber glow in the trees had gone out at the moment the roots moved, it came out of the forest. Seraphine Vaught's account of the first sighting of the creature is the document that sits at the front of the Guild's Bloodbuck Fenrir file and has sat there since the file was created. I have read it so many times that I can recite sections from memory, and I will not do that here. I will not do it justice in excerpts, but I will tell you what she wrote in her own words when she described the first moment she saw it clearly. Not a wolf, something pretending to be one, the way a painting of fire pretends to be fire. Its body creaked like the oldest timbers of the oldest house you have ever stood in, settling in the dark. And the flower, the great red flower on its back, was breathing, slowly, in and out. It turned toward me, and it was not because I had moved or made a sound. It turned toward me the way a flower turns toward the sun, because I was warm and it knew where warm things were. The eyes were lamps and they were not empty. Whatever was behind them knew exactly what we were. It was deciding how it wanted this to go. Seraphine Vaught, Sole Survivor Account, The Deep Grove Expedition, Year 1 of the Third Age of Recording. What followed over the next several hours, the full documentation of which exists in the Guild archive, is among the most harrowing accounts in the Encyclopedia's source record. The creature did not attack immediately. It circled the remaining camp members with slow, deliberate creaking steps, always just at the edge of the firelight. Roots moved across the path back to the forest entrance at a pace that could not be outrun, but was never quite fast enough to feel like a closing door until the door was already closed. The pollen came in waves. Members of the party made decisions that, in their accounts from later, they understood to have been the product of the hallucinations, walking toward sounds that did not exist, moving in directions that served the creature rather than themselves, separating from the group in moments of apparent certainty that were in fact moments of profound deception. Aldous Crane died 3 hours into the encounter. His journal was found the following week, on the forest floor at the edge of the deep grove, placed, not dropped, placed, with the pages open and the most recent entry face up. The Guild researchers who found it have always speculated about that detail. I have my own view. I believe the creature put it there. I believe it understood in some way what the journal was and it wanted it found. I believe the creature was, in the most disturbing sense of the phrase, sending a message to whoever came next, to whoever read it and understood what they were reading. Seraphine Vaught escaped by entering the root hollow of a large fallen tree and remaining there completely still for 11 hours until full daylight. She was found on the road 5 miles from the deep grove walking east. She was covered in thorn wounds that had amber residue hardened in them. She would carry those scars for the rest of her life. She was not delirious, which surprised the healer who first treated her. She was, by all accounts, completely calm. The calm, she later wrote, of someone who has understood something clearly and is still deciding how to feel about it. She wrote her account within the week. She submitted it to the naturalist societies of 3 different cities. She spent the following 8 years advocating for what eventually became the first formalized monster research protocols in the region, the protocols that 3 centuries of development later became the foundations of the Guild I now lead. She never returned to the Deep Grove. But she spent the rest of her career compiling every secondary account of the creature she could find, annotating them, cross-referencing them, building the first partial understanding of what she had survived into a document that was the original foundation of this file. Her last annotation, written in a hand that has grown less steady over the decades it took her to compile the document, reads simply, "It did not chase us, it waited. I have thought about nothing else in 30 years and I still cannot decide whether that makes it more dangerous or less. I believe more, I believe it knew we were not going anywhere. I believe it was correct." The bloodbuck Fenrir is still in the deep grove. Other specimens have been documented across the continent in primary growth forests from the northern reaches to the southern coasts. The Guild monitors 13 known territories, observes from safe distance and has standing protocols that amount essentially to a very well-reasoned argument for not going in. The creature has not changed in 300 years of documentation. It has not needed to. It was finished before we started watching. And somewhere in the ancient dark of those forests, amber light pulses through knotted wood and breathing petals turn toward whatever warmth they can find, patient and unhurried and entirely at home in the night they were built for. Do not follow the lights. Do not walk toward sounds that know your name. Do not enter the beautiful forest alone and trust the beauty. I am Corvin Blackmere. This has been Volume 18 of the Monster Research Guild Encyclopedia, the bloodbuck Fenrir, the Vermilignis Thornmaw, the thing that wears the wolf, the thing that owns the forest, the thing that waited for Seraphine Vaught to leave her hollow and walk out of the trees and did not follow. I have wondered for years why it let her go. I think finally I know the answer, but knowing it has not made me sleep better, and so I will not share it tonight because I would rather you went to sleep wondering than knowing. Wonder is survivable, what I believe may not be. Stay close to the fire, and if the lights come, close your eyes, count to 10, and when you open them again, walk the other way, every time, no exceptions, not once, not even once. Good night. End of Volume 18, The Bloodbuck Fenrir. Corvin Blackmere, Guild Head Monsterologist, author of the Field Encyclopedia. You have reached the end of the text.